a meeting at noon with Wayne, and it was my fault. We had a meeting for 12:30. My apologies. I have retweeted it. Hope somebody's watching us. If you're not right now, you will listen to us later. We're going to talk about state of enterprise cloud and wherever that discussion takes us. And IT, we can't avoid that discussion when we talk about enterprise cloud. So let's see where this discussion takes us. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about SAP's earnings and Microsoft's earnings yesterday, and cloud in general, developers, operators, all kind of stuff. Right, Wayne?
I'm
Welcome.
excited since I have no idea what we're going to talk about, Sarbjeet.
That is the beauty of it. I like those discussions off the cuff, and we just free form it, right? So it's not scripted. How you have been?
I've been pretty good. Living on the Texas Gulf Coast, I've been subject to any number of storms.
Mhm.
I've survived them all. I think the storm season is now over with Zeta hitting New Orleans, missing me. Business-wise, I saw a big downturn when coronavirus hit.
Mhm.
And then a couple of my clients were essential industries, so they took off again. And what I see in the market is a lot of uncertainty. There'll be a call, we got to do this now. And then a month later, it's, well, we decided we want to rethink it, so go away for a month. Right now, I'm juggling 3 or 4 new opportunities where companies have said, we see that we're at some point going to be over the coronavirus. Yeah. And we know if we are positioned properly, when it ends, we will do well. And if we're not positioned properly, we will not do well. So come help us figure out how to define doing well and what to do. So for me, as you may know, I do board and CEO advisory work in IT. A lot of what I do is around digital optimization, which is better, faster, cheaper, doing what you do.
Yeah.
But some of it is real digital transformation, which is, to me, culture, markets, products, customer experience, employee experience. And so when I get brought in to do those things, it starts as a short engagement, help us plan. And we always founder on the rocks of technical debt.
Yeah.
The companies I work with, I don't primarily work with Silicon Valley companies, with mid-Manhattan companies. I'm in flyover country, legacy companies and legacy industries with 20, 30, 40-year-old IT infrastructures. And a lot of it is, that would be great if you could do it, but you can't.
You can't.
And so we run into that. I break the bad news to CEOs, to CFOs, to CIOs all the time. Everybody that you read about can do that, but you can't, because you've got, I said to one client, you have a state-of-the-art 2005 infrastructure in 2019. And we spent the last 18 months bringing them to a state-of-the-art 2020 infrastructure. So that's how business is. It's very variable. It's very chaotic, but that's probably how everybody's seeing business these days.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of variation in, just talk about the infrastructure only. The refresh cycles for the banking industry is around 2 years, right? 2 to 3 years. 2 for more like their core businesses, which is like investing, and they run these investment scenarios, and they need the latest and greatest machines and all that stuff. So that their refresh cycles around hardware is around 2 years, which I learned when I was working at Rackspace, talking to all these banks and all that stuff, and even from VMware days. But then you go to the normal banking, the refresh cycles go more, means like you don't need to refresh your servers every 2 years. It can be 4 in that case. And then down you go within the same vertical, different refresh cycles. And then you go to other industries like, retail or entertainment. They're different. They behave differently, right? So we've seen that. And the one pattern I have seen in this current situation is that the money is not evaporating, means like for tech spend I'm talking about, right? So it's like shifting big time. So the money where it was allocated in February this year for certain projects, that some I mean, most of those, not some of those projects had to be stalled in April, May, June timeframe,
Mhm.
and then they had to divert that money into more like CX, which is customer experience, out of necessity, right? So I've seen like even the little grocery stores here in the Bay Area, they started shipping groceries to your home,
Mhm.
right? They were not doing that at all in the beginning. Kaiser is a big healthcare provider in the northern California, actually, whole California on the west side, west actually, in western part of the U.S. They're big, right? They totally stopped seeing patients inside in clinic. Like everything went just telemedicine, right? So they had to do it that spend. Are you seeing that sort of pattern out there?
Wow, that was a broad question. Let me start by saying I spent about 30 years of my career in financial services. So when you talk about banking, you clearly are talking about investment banking.
Yeah.
I started my IT career on Wall Street. And when I was there, if it was a matter of spending $10 million or $20 million or $50 million, and they realized they could make it back in a reasonable time, the money flowed like water. There
Yeah.
was never a problem getting cash for a project that looked like it had reasonable risk and reasonable ROI.
Hmm.
I spent most of my time in retail banking, in lending, mortgage lending, credit card lending, subprime lending. And you talk about 2-year refresh cycles and 3-year refresh cycles. I once worked for a bank that was the last bastion of OS2 in America. And when they bought my bank in year 2000, they
Hmm.
were actually scrounging token ring from eBay because they had several thousand branches all running token ring and OS2. So don't mistake banking as a monolith. It
Hmm.
runs the gamut. Branch banking tends to be done on the cheap. Investment banking is a very different animal. I've also worked in healthcare. And in fact, when you look at healthcare spend and you talk about telemedicine, to me, the telemedicine revolution, which to your point was required by trying to keep isolation, was not a technical thing. The
Hmm.
technology for, I'll call it level one telemedicine, which is talk to me on the phone and show me your arm on the video screen, was out there. The hospitals all had it, the providers all had it. What changed was two things, both regulatory. And so when we talk about tech, a lot of tech is regulatory. What happened was, number one, they made it legal to practice medicine across state lines. I don't know how much your listeners know about healthcare, but if you're a doctor licensed, I live in Texas, you can't practice medicine in Louisiana. You have to go get
Yeah.
licensed in Louisiana, as though medicine somehow changed when you cross the border. With COVID, they said you can practice medicine anywhere in the country. So all of a sudden, a doctor in Louisiana could practice in California. That was number one. Number two, medicine is driven by reimbursement. You don't pay for it. I don't pay for it. Someone else pays for our healthcare. And so when the CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, opines, remember they run the government programs, Medicare, Medicaid, VA part of it.
Yeah.
And so when they say something is okay, all the private insurers tend to move in lockstep. So if you were getting reimbursed for an in-person level one visit, you might got X. If it was telemedicine, you got 1/4 X or 1/5 X. They bumped that. All of a sudden, you could get paid for telemedicine. So now let's look at these two factors in confluence. I could have a doctor from a lower cost part of the country, or a place where I might have had slack in my system, delivering medicine to my clients in a higher paid part of the country, and I could get reimbursed.
Yeah.
So that drove the change in telemedicine more than the technology. Now, the hospitals all had it there, the doctors had it there, but they were able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I was talking to David Linthicum last year. We talked. They used to record these three shows: one for Australia, one for it's called educational in cloud, and then the third one, a CIO show. So we recorded these three episodes, and in the Australia show segment, we talked about the regulators international and national regulators, right? And in and we talked about like how with one stroke of a pen you can change the direction of the industry, or big time actually. In this case, they say, okay, now you can do cross border, Madison state border in this case, and then things change very quickly, right? So the regulators have a lot of power, I think, to word things, but in general, I think even most of it, we know that most of tech is self-regulated. We know that, right? So we're not highly regulated. Medicine is, but tech is not,
I don't necessarily agree with that. Let me
right?
tell you,
Hmm.
when you asked me what the business model of Uber and Airbnb would be, I would tell you they're law firms. They're lobbying firms more than they're tech firms. The
Hmm.
technology in Uber is relatively simple technology, just scaled quite large.
Yeah.
What is their biggest change? Is they were able to get the taxi monopolies reduced or removed in a lot of regulatory areas. So I'm a New Yorker by birth. You had to have a taxi medallion to pick somebody up, drop them off. The fight that they went through to get Uber into New York City was epic. And it was not a technology discussion, it was a legal, regulatory, and lobbying discussion. Look what's going on now with the New York Post versus social media. The fourth biggest circulation newspaper in the country is being taken to task by senators today, happens
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
today,
Hmm.
for not letting them publish what they want. And regardless of your politics, regardless of what you think about what they published, this is an unprecedented thing that a tech company has chosen who they're going to let on the air, so to speak, on their huge social media platform. So
So,
I think there's a lot more regulatory capture, a lot of rent-seeking behavior in tech, more than maybe we give it credit for.
no, actually, that's what I meant. Actually, the tech, most of the tech is self-regulating. There's no regulation around social media. There's no regulation which says that what you can publish, like if you're a publisher or not. Like they have some protections in place. Yeah, that's the only regulatory part which is there. But besides that, they are self-regulating, right? And that's a part of the problem. I mean, regulation. I'm not saying regulation is bad. I think it's good in this case. We need some regulation, so the rules of the road are clear. The problem with the regulations is that it's always behind the curve. um, and if you regulate a little too late, then you are locking in the almost like a monopoly of these platforms which have already gone beyond certain size, or it can be duopolies, or it can be 3 4 vendors in there. But then if you introduce regulation at that point, then the newcomers are having a hard time to get in because the regulation stops them too, right?
Mhm.
So it's a kind of double-edged sword, if you will. But then I wanted to, the one pattern actually I saw there was like, in this sort of context, is that COVID, with the COVID crisis, right? Uh, we were given the permission, regulators as well as the corporations, or even non-incorporated private entities, that it gave us permission to be scrappy. Like we can have like hacky kind of solutions put out there, and then people are willing to live up with some like subpar user interface, subpar services. We know that we have to do it, right? um, and does that play some role into the spend change and or the tech adoption?
Well, anytime you have a regulated environment, whatever your industry is, and the gloves come off, the regulations are relaxed, that's going to change the way we invest. To me, I got to say, I'm going to make a prediction on your show
Sure.
that in 5 years, there will not be a coronavirus that sickens a person in the world. The common cold coronaviruses, anything else caused by coronaviruses, we're going to knock them flat. Partly because if you look at vaccinology, if you look at immunology, if you look at all these medical practices, what used to happen? I couldn't publish anything unless it was peer reviewed.
Yeah.
So Number one, it was peer reviewed, which means it could take a number of years to get out there. Number two, everything was published behind a paywall. I was talking to a local hospital here, and I discovered they paid over $100,000 a year to let their employees, their clinicians and researchers, access the medical journals because there's such expensive paywalls behind which the stuff is published. With COVID, a lot of stuff went to preprint servers. So double-edged sword, to your point. All of a sudden, a guy like me could read the research being done in COVID. I was reading this stuff the same time the doctors and the public health departments around the world were reading it. So that's good and bad, right? It scares the heck out of us. Mm-hmm. We read something and go, oh my God, and we all go running in that direction. And then they publish another article 2 weeks later that says, wait a minute, that was wrong. This is right. But at the same time, we've unbound thousands of researchers. They no longer are publishing behind a paywall. They're no longer dependent on the peer review system, good and bad. A lot of low quality stuff is getting out there. But on the other hand, we've opened it up like we've opened up so much other university research. You think about how the internet was developed. All of a sudden, we're developing medical technology with the same openness as the way the internet came up. And the internet has its good and bad points over the years. You know, it's done things well and done things badly. Who would have ever guessed what a distributed denial of service attack was 25, 30 years ago? Yeah. What are the equivalents going to be in the human genome in 5 or 10 or 15 years? I don't know. But I mean, it's basically accelerated the progress in an area that was bottled up. So as a human being, forget being an IT person, as a human being, I think medical research is going to advance between a decade and a generation in the 12 months that started in February of 2020.
Yeah, that we have seen that. We have seen that it's happening in front of our eyes. As you said, it's like one thing that this whole pattern you just described, it has sort of opened up to the whole society that how vulnerable our systems are, or how vulnerable, not the hardware, software systems, but systems in general, like healthcare system, our political systems, and how the thin the veneer is, and then underneath that is like is a big mess, right? We see
jungle that. Naked in tooth and claw, I think is the quote. Sarbjeet, look, I used to work in the electrical power industry. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to study an industry that is fraught with peril, dig into how power is generated, transmitted, and distributed. Heck, you're in California. You live it every day. Yeah. But if you look at the fragility of the entire electrical generation system and the gas pipe system and the water systems, I used to work in electricity, but we hung out with the people getting water to your house. And the stories they tell will curl your hair. Yeah. Pipes buried 150 years ago, and nobody knows where the pipe is or even if it's still a pipe. And yet your water is coming from that. And with electricity, look, again, I'll make some predictions. This is a fun platform you've got because I'm talking live.
Yeah.
When you look at microgrids, you look at distributed photovoltaic generation, you look at local battery storage, that is the salvation of the electric grid in this country. We are rapidly getting to the point of overloading the grid, partly because people don't want the high voltage towers. They don't want the 230,000 volt and 460,000 volt towers running through their area. And in California, because they catch fire and everybody burns up.
Yeah.
But nobody wants it anyway. And so we have this problem of getting electricity from places where we can make it to places where we want to consume it. That's known as the transmission grid. Yes. And we're falling way behind on that. And so my hope is with solar roofs, with microgrid, community solar, we're going to change the nature of electricity distribution. And all of a sudden, we won't need to haul it halfway across the country. We got to figure out a way to store it because electricity is a consumable. If you have it and don't need it, by the way, do you know what happens if you have electricity and nobody will take it from you? If you have a generator and you can't put the load somewhere, you know what happens? The stuff blows up. So, in fact, power plants have huge copper bus bars buried in the ground. And in the worst case, when nobody will take the power for free, they turn rock into glass by dumping power into the ground. It's a crazy industry. It's really one of those things like an airplane ride when, if you're not on the airplane, they get no value out of it. If you're
Yeah.
not there to take the electricity when I make it, then I lose it. So being able to generate it where I want it and being able to time shift it will change the distribution and transmission grid and will be what lets us make it through the next X number of years without really seeing that part of the veneer fall apart.
Yeah, I worked with Texas grid. There's a entity, actually, I'm forgetting the name of that, outside
ERCOT.
Austin.
ERCOT. It's called
Yeah,
ERCOT, the Energy Reliability Council of Texas.
yeah, ERCOT, yes, they were our customer from EMC days, and when I was there, highly skilled environment. I couldn't touch the keyboard to type there. You know, we were doing a lot of data center related work, but funny enough, they had their sort of fine prints of their layouts and stuff like that, the plans on on the wall, which I could read and take picture of me if I wanted to, but I couldn't touch the keyboard. But anyways, that's a funny story there. You know how that goes. Some data centers.
I'm a Texas person in the electricity business. See, ERCOT's unique.
Yeah.
ERCOT is a place where private industry kind of got together with the Texas government imprimatur and said, let's form an association where we're going to manage the power for the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And so it's a relatively unique construct in that everybody generating power, everybody using power, all work together to make sure that there's as little blockage in the grid as possible. It would be great if we could have that at the national scale, but they just don't have it yet. And so ERCOT is a great, I love living in Texas because if the power fails around the country, it's likely not going to fail in Texas.
Yeah. Let's come back to what the core, the enterprise cloud and IT. And we still do compare cloud with electricity, like the analogy, right? Mm-hmm. So, we don't produce our own electricity, but we get it from the grid and we pay for what we use and all that good stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But now we're talking about producing our own electricity at home through Tesla's batteries inside the home, mm-hmm. or roof, solar roofs and all that stuff, right? And that's a new trend we will catch on to. So we rely less on the grid, so less on the cloud in this sort of parallel.
So would you call that edge computing then?
Yes, it's edge electricity, edge computing. Yes, true. Yeah, that's a long discussion. Edge discussions are very slippery slopes, right? Edge is a very relative term, as we know. Your data center, your regional data center can be edge, or your phone can be an edge, device, if you will, or closet sort of data centers, where we call smaller closets, are edges, and
I think the simple way to look at edge is a solution to the problem of latency.
Exactly.
I've got to make a hard real-time decision. I've got my compute resource here, wherever here is, and I've got the sensor actuator here, and I've got to make a decision, sensor data to central computing to actuator. When my latency gets too long and I start dropping parts off my assembly line or stitching the wrong part of your body in a robot surgeon, now I have to start thinking about putting compute near the device.
Yeah.
So the faster, it's a trade-off, right? We keep getting lower latency, we keep getting faster bandwidth, but we keep getting an ever-increasing need for data at the point we live at the point we work at the point we exist at. So if we get 5G or Starlink and we cut the latency down, all of a sudden edge becomes an interesting architecture. If we don't have that, it becomes an essential architecture. So I think it's just the trade-off between everything can be piled up in one place or everything has to be strung out.
I think we will have the combination. We already had edge in a way. It was called CDN, but it was more like one way. Even the CDN, we could push the data through CDN back to the cloud or central repositories, if you will. We have been doing it for the last 40 years or so 30, 40 years, right? So gradually we did more and more and more, right? So now we have a new term for it, and I think the need for very high throughput bandwidth kind of networks is that's latency related, as you said, sort of requirement, which makes us go use this new term, like it creates urgency, in a way that for self-driving cars or the robotics in healthcare, like you don't want to have higher latency, like when you're operating on body, somebody is under the knife, if you will, and you don't want to kill the
Two
person.
things. One is latency, and the other one is availability. If the link
Yeah.
fails and you're in the middle of slicing somebody open,
Yeah.
that really stinks.
Yeah.
But the concept, I think, if you, again, I know we said we weren't going to talk about edge, and here we are. But the concept is what's called an OODA loop, OODA. When something happens to us, we observe, what do we see? We orient, what does that mean? We decide, what do we do about it? And we act, we do something. And that came out of fighter pilot research in the 1950s. Colonel Boyd, who studied why fighter pilots lived and beat their other fighter pilots. And it works with our IT systems as well. The system we build, whether it's a robotic system, a car, a visual system, a robot, observes, what am I seeing? What do I do about it? What do I do? And then do it. And so we've got to provide that OODA loop in real time for many things that are interesting. Internet of Things, which is self-driving cars, augmented reality, a whole bunch of stuff that happens where you are and the computer isn't. And so again, I think edge becomes not a unique thing. To me, I think it's just wherever you put the ends of the computer. When I was a young kid starting out in IT, IBM had the 360s and the 370 mainframes. And if you ever looked at the design, there was this CEC, the Central Electronic Complex. And then driving the I/O devices were things called channels, which were mini computers. So there was an edge situation already. The computer was 1,000 times or 10,000 times or 1,000,000 times faster than the rotating disk drive. And so we put this computer in the middle of it to buffer.
Yeah.
To manage the slow, stupid device, card readers and printers. And so we built out even a central computer, which might have been 50 feet, 100 feet from one end to the other, still had core and edge because of the latency and the bandwidth between the I/O device and the physical memory of the computer. So we've been doing this since we had computers by just channelizing and distributing pieces of it within a computer room.
Yeah. No. These are the age-old concepts, but we give them different sort of names, terms. We use different terms to sort of heighten the urgency behind those things. I think
get investment dollars. Come on, man! It's to get investment dollars and build the next unicorn.
Exactly. Actually, that is part of it. You have to raise the money without. If you want to change, we all know that. There's most of our listeners as well, that like if you want to see where the future is going, just follow the money, right? Where the money is going and where we are investing these days, and from there you can see where we're going. So coming back to me going a little bit backwards again, more into the core IT systems and software, the type of applications we use and all that stuff, and the role of developers. We had this big Twitter. We always have these big Twitter threads going on. How is this bigger? What are the sort of mega trends in the consumption of technology? Do you see? And I can give my 2 cents after I hear you. I see some big mega trends happening.
Let's start with what happened this week. I think that's what started our discussion that led to this call. Is SAP dropped precipitously. And so there was a tweet jam going on this morning, kind of perfectly timed for this call. What happened to SAP? And my comment, I'll make it again, is these legacy ERP, CRM, EHR, electronic health record systems, whatever they may be, have been supplanted by modern SaaS-based architectures. And by that, I don't mean picking up the legacy system and running it on somebody's cloud. When you looked at systems designed around SAP's generation and Oracle's generation and the big EHR generations. They were designed for very large customers,
Yes.
multinational in scope, who wanted control of that code. They wanted heavily customized systems because that's how they thought they had to run their business. Brazil had to be different than Argentina, had to be different than Estonia. And so they wanted that ability to do as much of it as they could. So you wound up with pushing the state of the art in memory consumption, in cycle consumption on CPUs. And so you wound up with architectures that were compromises between what we wanted to do, totally flexible, totally modular, totally everything, and what we could do at a reasonable cost on the hardware of 30 and 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And so fast forward, now we've got the architecture of 30 and 40 years ago on platforms that are 10,000 times as fast. But the problems we're solving are 11,000 times as hard.
Yeah.
Potentially. So, and then you look, and the example I gave this morning, because I'm doing an installation for a client, Microsoft Dynamics 365. Let's take that as the example. And I will say that Workday, Salesforce, some of the other platforms have similar capabilities, but I know Microsoft's the best. So here we have a Microsoft ERP, which is the rewrite of a lot of old ERPs. They modernized the architecture. They built it on top of their SQL Azure product, a multi-tenant big SQL. They built it on Cosmos, their data warehouse. These are products they sell as platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. And then Microsoft has the Power Platform, Power BI, Power Apps, and what used to be called Flow. Now it's called Power Automate.
Yeah, low code, no code.
You put all the low code, no code, and BI stuff sitting next to our core ERP. And by the way, if you look at Microsoft's evolution, more and more they're rewriting D365 in these low code products. Then they sit the whole thing on top of a common data model, which is published in GitHub. So if you want to know how Microsoft is instantiating data structures, go to GitHub, download it. It's sitting on a common data service, which is an accessible kind of semantic layer on top of their database. So all of a sudden, I can buy an ERP from a company that's spending, 9 figures a year enhancing it, that runs on a cloud platform that's licensed by the drink, by the user by the month, that I can implement in a relatively short period of time, that is not built around a proprietary ABAP type language, like SAP or Oracle. So all of a sudden, I wind up with a very scalable data warehouse-based, low-code-based, BI-based system sitting on top of an ecosystem that supports what Microsoft calls mixed reality, AR, VR, IoT, and so on. How can you compete with that if you've got a monolithic legacy platform that you're frantically trying to pull apart? So that's the challenge for these big integrated companies. Their success of being able to deliver a lot of things that work well together, very tightly integrated, are now becoming their weakness in 2020, when I can buy modular devices and stuff and plug them together in different and interesting and novel ways. So I think that's the challenge they've got. And I call it the tyranny of the installed base. If you're SAP or it doesn't matter. I'm not picking an SAP.
Oracle.
SAP. Anybody with a large installed base of companies with 9-figure and 10-figure investments. And again, Sarbjeet, we'll talk about technical debt if you care. I can go on a soapbox about that. So here we are. We've got $500 million or $1 billion worth of custom work and integrated ERP. And now the vendor comes to me and says, hey, we're going to come out with a whole new platform, and it's going to be cloud-based and SaaS-based, blah, 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 blah. What are you going to say? Hell no, I don't want that. I don't want the risk. I don't want the cost. I don't want to have to retrain my whole staff. I don't want the performance hit. I've got all this hardware that I know it runs on, and now you're telling me to get rid of it. And so let's face the reality. Take a CIO in a big company, probably 50 years old, late 50s. CEO is mid 50s to late 50s, early 60s. What are they going to say? If we can just get by for a few years and not change this, we get to retire. We get our pension, we get our stock option, we get our restricted shares, and we sail off into the sunset. If we try a full-scale platform shift in a large company, what do we have? 3 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years of aggravation. A terrible story in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes if we screw it up. And all of a sudden, we're the laughing stock of the country club.
Yeah,
So,
actually, I used to work at Visa, and I have done my fair share of customizations in the field from Commerce Fund days, working with Siemens in Germany and all that stuff, like where they will easily spend like $2 million to customize the software we provided them, right? And then we upgrade to the next level. And the funny thing was we switched our platform on the back end. We used to be a Microsoft shop. It was written in .NET sort of technologies, and Sun gave us servers and the coders, and actually not the coders. We were the coders. I was a coder at that point, and they gave us architects to port that whole thing to Java. Right, we did that. But when we went to Siemens, like for upgrade, the upgrades were going to be like easier if they were on the same language, same everything, right? But now we switched to Java, and it's like we said, okay, just to port the existing customizations to the newer next version, it's $700,000, right? Almost close to a million. And they said, what the heck? We didn't ask you to change the platform underneath, right? So it was still the old stack, like we were like going there. It was not as a service world yet, but I think same sort of problems sort of persist, and the investments which have gone into all these ERP systems, they're huge. Not only the financial investments, but uh, the the customizations and the way you do stuff. It just people don't
the
want to change.
training and the culture, the way you
And the
build your IT organization around the function of Oracle or SAP or you name it.
yeah.
Yeah, you
So
build an
so
entire multi-generational IT stack.
yeah, exactly. So I will give you an example. I think stories are powerful in a way that we can take from real life. At Siemens, when we went there, we wanted to give them more like newer bells and whistles on B2B e-commerce and modern systems, and you can transact it, like you can do supplier ratings and this and that, right? And Siemens is huge, as you know, right? In we were working with SPLS, which is like a shared services group within Siemens, right? Which provides such technology to all Siemens companies, different companies, right? So uh, these people will not. They didn't want to move from the green screens. They say when I press F2 and F8, the whole thing happens, right? Like whatever their workflow was. Then now I have to do 4 clicks. I don't want to change, right? And they couldn't see persona based sort of messaging, if you will, or convincing people who are doing the work at the worker level, like they said, we don't want to change the system, and then it just trickles up or goes up, right? Up the chain, and there was resistance to change. And Europe is a little different than US culture wise and all that stuff. We know that it's workers have a lot more say than in the
Yes.
US. So the change is hard. At Visa, there are two systems, base one and base two. That's how Visa runs. It's a settlement company, as you know. So we want to change the base one system from IBM TPF to Java, right? We spent, I think, more than $200 million back then in the 97, 98 timeframe. And we said, cut, like, don't go forward, because it could not match the speed of TPF on the back end, right? The Java couldn't. Older systems, it's our dream to replace them, but but they are well entrenched into the culture. People don't want to change, and they are working. So I think the best foot forward for most of the companies is to build bolt-on sort of systems of differentiation, applications which differentiate Ford from Chrysler,
Yeah.
Ford from GM, right? Safeway from Lucky Hitter and grocery stores, different vendors, right? So build those on top of systems of record which are already in place. I think that's the best foot forward. And keeping that in mind, I think the older ERP companies like Oracle and SAP, two big ones here in this case, I think they need to give the tools to developers to build on top of that. They need to become platforms as
Mhm.
compared to this applications, a group of applications, if you will, so people can build on top of. Um, from these two companies, I think Oracle has done a little better job of that than SAP. It's all relative, but both have done a poor job of, I think, enticing developers to come to their platforms. And but SAP is lagging a little behind. Your
Well,
take?
enticing developers and having tools are two different things. Oracle, I've been an Oracle customer on and off for 30 years, going back to when it was all, the old character mode stuff and when Siebel was Tom Siebel.
Yeah.
Very, very different world. And so
Yes.
Oracle's been trying to build the Oracle bus structure and hang their various applications on a bus for at least 20 years. And 20 years ago, I actually implemented an Oracle CRM on demand was the name of the product. It wasn't Siebel, it was CRMOD
Yeah.
running in a data
I was
center.
working at Oracle. We had three flavors of
Right.
CRM.
Right.
Yes.
So, but it was run. I think the data center was San Antonio, Texas. I actually bought telephony from Oracle. Nobody believes me. Oracle had a cloud-based telephone platform. I had 10,000 people across the United States. I had an Oracle Release 11 backend
Hmm.
and a Salesforce implementation that somebody bought in another country, and they were trying to bolt them together. And Oracle came to me with an API that was almost free. And when I connected the CRM on demand to the telephone system to the back end Oracle on prem, heavily customized, it was wonderful because the APIs worked and worked well, and Oracle knew how they worked. So the technology, in my view, has been there for a while. Now, getting a developer to want to work in a proprietary closed system. I worked for a bank once that was probably the last big mainframe assembler shop in the United States. And they would recruit people out of college to learn mainframe assembler, which they never learned in college, and they paid them big bonuses. And all the proprietary systems, everything was in-house and everything was assembler. And I thought they were out of their bloody minds because they were locking themselves in. They were getting better and better at being them, but had lessened ability to be something else if they had to move. And so when you look at Oracle or SAP, or again, I'm going to put the EHR vendors in there, you can build a modularity, and the system of record can still remain that high transaction volume, ZOS based or heavy duty Unix based number crunching system. Fine. But look what it does to the vendor. So here I am, I'm a vendor. I was a software vendor once or twice in my life. I know you've been. So where do I put my investment dollars? I have this platform that's my cash cow. I've been eating off it for the last 20 years. And now I discover that I really need to make a platform shift. In my case, it was mainframes to PCs. And so I was in financial services, and all of my new clients, all the prospects wanted the PC-based product. But my bread and butter main clients, the ones that gave me all the dollars, didn't want a PC. This was the early days of PCs. We like our green screen 3270s. Don't spend a nickel. Spend that money on what I need over here. I call it the tyranny of the installed base. The people that are your most loyal customers are fighting with you not to move to the new platform. Not that they don't like the new platform. It's they don't want the investment dollars spent on something they're not going to use.
The
They
sunk
want
cost.
all that money on, well, it's not sunk cost. It's the cost of maintaining their platform. So I've got $500 million invested in your ERP, and you've got $100 million or $200 million worth of enhancements a year as a vendor. So the vendor can come to me and say, I'm going to put $200 million into your platform. Or they can say, I'm going to put $100 million into your platform and $100 million into this other platform over here. Well, I don't want that other platform over here. Don't take that money, my maintenance dollars, and put them to building a product I can't use. So you've got to have the intestinal fortitude, the strategy and execution to be able to shift platforms so that the new sales can be made to customers that don't want the dinosaur. They want that newer, more flexible, more modular, more modern system, but you still got to appease all of your existing base, or they raise hell with your board of directors, with your supervisory board, with your CEO. And so it's a very tough situation that these companies find themselves in. And the more successful they are, the more the problem becomes. If their old platform with people abandoning it, they would have no problem shifting. But because everybody on it likes it, it's much harder to take money away from the cash cow and put it
No,
towards something else.
no, I get your point. I get the premise, the base premise behind your narrative. But I think I disagree with you on one thing, that people don't want to change. People do want to change. People do want to move to the next level. The newer architectures, the newer software. The problem is that they don't want to waste the investments they have made in their existing systems. Operators love legacy more than creators, which is developers. Developers don't like legacy. They want to go to the bleeding edge, the cutting edge. So I think as industry analysts, pundits, or practitioners, practitioners mostly talk about it, but mostly analysts and or industry pundits, like, we don't talk about what percentage of the software is written in-house and what percent of the software you're buying, or what percentage of your, like, even more refined question is, what percentage of your product is software. I was listening to a Steve Jobs sort of talk from I think 1989 or something, like very old sort of snippet on YouTube. And he gave example to some students at MIT he was talking to, and he said, like, for banks, he was talking about the PC era back then, right? He said, like, for banks, the whole product is software.
Hmm.
It's an idea and some things on the paper, and then it's software, like the derivatives and all that stuff. It's purely software. The products are just software products. It's nothing tangible. You can't buy a derivative, right? So it doesn't look like this, right? So so I think it's a good idea for all companies to look inside, and it's like, what percentage of our product is software or turning into software, right? So your music is going from these CDs to just software, right? Your pictures are going from these old style, like print to the software, right? Your healthcare is going software. Your construction is going software with 3D printing. Like, what portion of that is going to be software? What it is right now, and if you don't invest in those, like that transition to software, I think your products will shrink. And I think that's the fact, right?
Well, in the long run, but as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. The question for the CEO is, what's going to happen next quarter? Because I'm held to that standard. So to your point, look, I work in flyover country in legacy industries. My clients are in manufacturing. My clients are in logistics. They're in construction. Let me tell you, the amount of software in pouring concrete to make a driveway is darn near zero in most concrete companies. Could they use more technology? Heck yes. Does the CEO who came up pouring concrete and now is the CEO of the concrete company believe that in his or her heart? No. So the question always becomes, I'm not a pundit, I'm not an analyst, I'm a working CIO that happens to advise CEOs. So I've got to deal with the person at the top of a logistics company delivering stuff in trucks. I've got to work with the people making stuff, with people in factories screwing stuff together by hand. These are my clients.
But isn't it a job? Isn't it your job to guide them to prepare for future?
Yes, and part of my job is to guide them, but part of my job also, as I said to you earlier, I get hired because somebody says, I want to do what I call a digital transformation or a digital optimization. All too often, we discover that first we have to dig out of the pit of 20 years of technical debt. That your old system is so old that Microsoft no longer supports it, or Oracle no longer supports it. I had one client that was a huge publicly traded company, and they came to me and said, we can no longer get our Cisco router parts on eBay. And I said, what do you mean eBay? Oh, we're buying stuff is so old, used. I told you I worked for a major bank that was buying token ring stuff used off of eBay. And so when that's the thinking, because everybody's told save every penny, you wind up with this death spiral. And so first you've got to bring the CEO and the board out of that notion that conserving money on IT, that spending 1.1% of sales or 0.8% of sales or 1.3% of sales on technology, which is what utilities, logistics, some manufacturing, investment banking, where I started, was 10, 11, 12% of sales.
Yeah.
A very different way of thinking. By the way, the statement about technology and banking, there's a famous guy, his name is Walter Wriston. He's the architect of Citicorp. He took a little bank in New York and turned it into Citibank. And in 1970, he said, information about money is as valuable as the money itself. And at the time, that was a radical statement. We're in the era just barely getting into the 360 mainframe era.
Mm-hmm.
And the investment bankers all heard him say that in 1970. And they went, yes. And that's why they rule the world. People who didn't think that might have found themselves left behind by the derivatives, by the slick salespeople selling them collateralized mortgage obligations.
We got a little too creative there.
Yeah. But the problem is that one group invested in the weapons of war technology, and many other groups didn't. So part of my job is I walk the real world. Now, I'm not dealing with the Fortune 10. I'm not dealing with research organizations. I'm dealing with companies that have to satisfy the shareholders every quarter. And so I've got to walk a line between fix what's most broken and then put a little aside for the future.
Yeah,
it's a fine line.
A fine line. I get blamed for talking big company things, or people go, so you live in Silicon Valley, that's why you talk like that. And there's a flyover country here, like you can't relate to their problems. I think I can, because I have served many of those customers who are working with all these different vendors. It can be electricity grids, or it can be DMV from Kansas. I have done that. But I think we cannot just play this quarterly thing as a short-termism, even if you're in the middle of America, right, in the flyover country. I think we have to think a little long-term when it comes to technology strategy. I just recently said that I tried to come up with these narratives and like one-liners and stuff like that. It's like, if you don't have a macro technology strategy, you don't have any technology strategy. Then you're just fighting fire, right? You have to have a macro technology strategy, that we will be here in 3 years or 2 years or whatever that happens to be. And then you have a macro, that's a macro, right? And then within that, you can be more tactical about your selection of technology, your fixing problems and stuff like that,
but
right?
Of course, you have to tie that into the business's macro strategy. I mean, I can have a strategy. I'm a CIO, and my strategy is cloud only or cloud first. And if I go to the board with that, what is the board going to say to me? What the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
How is that going to help us sell a product to that new market? How is that going to help us sell a better warranty? How is that going to help us make a better product? So to your point about stories before, the job of the CIO, or I'm a surrogate CIO, I'm a consultant to CIOs and CEOs, is to be able to tell a story that resonates with a non-technical person. The board members of my clients typically are not tech savvy, and they're not even tech interested. Tech is something that happens, and they know they have to worry about the cybersecurity part of it because they read that in the paper. And most of them are trying to figure out just how to get their arms around it so they can participate intelligently in a meeting. And so as a CIO, it's about examples. It's about metaphors. It's about stories that convey the essential elements of what you're trying to tell them and get them thinking in the direction you want them. And that's how you kind of balance it, Sarbjeet, is you get this, we've got to talk about the macro strategy, but get them excited about why that's going to help sales volume, bottom line profit, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. So the key is to be part of the strategy setting for the company and have the IT strategy flow out of the company strategy, or the company strategy flow out of the IT strategy.
Yeah. I think it's just painting the picture of that art of the possible, what we call it, and the best story or the best way you can help these kind of customers is like by telling their peer stories. Like, okay, if you're AAA, then what Allstate is doing, for example, right? So if you're Pizza Hut, what Domino's is doing. So and then the same domain, like you have to. It's not a like scare tactic, but you got to tell them like, okay, we know your vertical. Sometimes we can't tell the names because we can't tell
Sure.
them which customer is using what. We'll say like one of the top three, blah blah blah. Like one of the top three banks did this, and this is the benefit they're reaping. Most of the time, they can find out who it is
Yeah.
from your talk. That you, it's like indirectly telling them
If you're in the vertical, you know who it is.
who it is. Yeah. So I think those kind of talks, narratives go a long way to help these kind of companies and change their minds, hearts and minds about technology stacks.
Yeah, but there's a but to that, Sarbjeet, and here's what it is. If you're in an industry that is considerably behind others, if you're in an industry that doesn't use advanced process thinking, that doesn't use technology, I'll use healthcare as an example. If you go to healthcare and look how they collect bills, they are so far behind the mortgage business, the credit card business, the used car business. Their credit granting skills are far behind. Their logistics skills are far behind those of logistics and warehousing companies. It seems to me two industries that I've worked in, healthcare and energy, are insular. Energy only hires other people from energy, and healthcare only hires people from the hospital down the street. That's my observation. So you want to be better than the other hospital down the street, but you're both awful compared to the best in the world.
Yeah.
So what I bring to clients is I've worked in healthcare and manufacturing and logistics and construction and financial services and software and blah, 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 blah. And so oftentimes we can say, let me tell you a story about how the subprime mortgage business granted credit. And maybe that applies to your energy company. And that's what I think the value of consultants are, or at least bringing in people who know how to do things in a different way from you. Boards need to open up. Companies need to open up. We talk about diversity a lot, and diversity is a real benefit, whether that's gender diversity, whether that's economic diversity, whether that's cultural diversity, whether that's just experience diversity.
Thought diversity, yeah.
You've got to be able to come in and say, I appreciate that's how you've done it here, but have you looked at doing it this way? And so I got another soapbox. If you're it starts with the board. If the board's not open to that, then they don't push the CEO to be open to that, and the CEO might not. So one of my points that I make a lot is the notion of a QTE, a qualified technology expert director.
I was gonna ask you that because you preach that sort of thing. So shed some light on that.
Yeah. So a long time ago, 20 years ago, when Enron and WorldCom were huge scandals and lost billions in shareholder money, the Securities and Exchange Commission mandated something called a QFE. One of the biggest issues of Sarbanes-Oxley, one of the biggest improvements, was this notion of a QFE. A QFE stands for Qualified Financial Expert. And that meant, believe it or not, somebody on the board that could read a financial statement.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? If you're never been on a board, you can't imagine the directors couldn't read Enron's financial statements, but they could. And their argument was, well, it was too complicated for us. So the SEC and the government said, you must have somebody with the right level of skill, demonstrable skill. Now, I call that the Full Employment Act for retired Big Four partners. If everybody went and hired a Big Four retired partner, put them at the head of the audit committee.
Yeah.
So about 4 years ago, Russell Reynolds, the search firm, wrote an article that I recommend to everybody in the IT space or board space called The Rise of the Qualified Technology Expert in the Boardroom. And Russ Reynolds argued that just like QFEs were needed in the year 2000, in 2016, we needed somebody that had the right skills and experience to manage IT risks, not just cybersecurity, but all IT risks. What if you fail an ERP implementation? What if your infrastructure falls over? What if you can't scale properly? And also can manage IT opportunities. What does AI mean? What does IoT mean? What does 5G mean? Blah, 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 blah. And so their argument is somebody should be on the board who can both be a technology expert and be a business person able to govern and oversee in the role of the board. And there are not that many IT people who want to do that, perhaps, or can do that. We tend to be geeky and we think in terms of IT stuff, but we need to open our minds. We need to move away from being the VP of DP and be a C-level executive able to guide a business strategy that happens to have a tech component.
I think we are trying to do that. The tech labor stack is shifting a little bit. Like the problem is that this is how I see it. Like it's not a problem. It's the pattern is this, that the SIs and these consulting firms, they when you hire them, they throw bodies at you. Like their goal is to provide you more and more so they can make more and more money, right? So there's that rise of the lone, QTE, that's what we call it, right? Qualified technology
expert director.
QTE, it is kind of hindered by that kind of thinking. And I think like to become QTE, I wish there was a firm which only employed QTEs and then they supply one at a time to these companies or two at a time, not like have this like long, like an army of other junior developers to throw at you. That's how it works. SIs work like that. And I've worked with most of the SIs, big five, big three these days. It's a culture in that part of our industry that it drives that kind of behavior, I think. And people are afraid to go to lone warriors or people who are single entities. But I think they are very valuable. They're invaluable. I know.
That's what I do, man.
I know exactly. I fight that fight all the time. I'm trying to be like you, like QTE for other companies and stuff like that. I mean, even for the last 4 years, and it's not easy, but I think the culture will shift gradually. There's in healthcare, in general healthcare, not healthcare, in general people's health sort of context. People say everybody should have a health advocate, right? I used to use that analogy, and you use this QFT, but I call it health advocate. So like everybody like should have a health advocate. So when you're sick or you hit by a bus, when you're taken to hospital or for a treatment, then somebody else can tell, like, do this. I know this person. I know the persona of this person and what he or she eats or exercises or whatever, right? And then they are your health advocate, because you can't make good decisions in the such situation when you're sick. These companies are in the same sort of kind of similar place, that they're technically sick, like they're sick on technology side, and they have blind spots. They can't fix themselves, so they need a technology advocate, and that can be a single person. Actually, you don't need an army of people to do that. So and I think people who have done a lot of work in different industries, as you said, they can make a perfect QTE.
Well, I appreciate you giving me a plug for what I do, but that's not really what I was describing. Well, let me try it differently.
Mm-hmm.
As a CIO, when you've earned the title CIO and you're more than the VP of DP, which is what we used to call this job, you are able to take your place in the C-suite. I'll tell you a story. I joined a company, and the next day after I joined was the board meeting. So we had a board dinner, and I got invited to meet the board. And so I'm sitting there at a restaurant having a glass of wine, dinner with a bunch of board members, and they don't know who I am, and I really don't know who they are. And we're talking. And at the end of the dinner, one of them said to me, "So I know you're an employee. What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm the new CIO." And the person looked at me and said, "I never would have guessed." And to me, that was about the best thing I ever heard from a board member. In 2 hours of conversation, they didn't know I was the IT guy. And so that's what CIOs should aspire to. We are, just like the CFO is seen as somebody who can run the company. Why can't the CIO be seen as that person who just happens to have that technical skill? Now, if you're a CIO, to your point, if the company is technically sick, to use your term, that's usually not the CIO's fault. I look CIOs in the eye squarely and say, that's your fault. You let this happen. Because one of the things I say to CEOs is the CEO gets the CIO they settle for. If you're willing to have a mediocre IT department as the CEO, shame on you. Don't do that.
I
Don't be
think
afraid.
I think you meant to say that you blame CEO, not CIO,
I'm
right?
sorry, I blame the
Yeah.
CEO. I
Yeah.
say to the CEO, it's your fault. The CEO gets the CIO they settle for.
Yeah.
So CEOs are at fault more than CIOs because they have the right to fire the CIO and get another one.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is if the CEO doesn't realize that he or she has a problem, that's where the board comes in. If you look at what a board of directors does, the board of directors provides oversight or governance. They
Yeah.
are the ones supposedly able to counsel and guide the CEO and maybe the rest of the C suite in looking around corners. So they're not managers, they're overseers and governors, and that's their job. And so if you're a CIO down here and you have a CEO that doesn't get it, having a board member up here that has the broad experience and can tap the CEO on the shoulder and say, hey,
Yeah.
there's a technology that you're missing, or
Yes.
what are you going to do about this situation? That changes the conversation. It's not the CIO just pushing up. It's a board member, just like the qualified financial expert, usually the chair of the audit committee, is able to say to the CEO and the CFO, there's a FASB or an international financial standard that you really need to be paying more attention to.
Yeah.
Or your strategic plan is missing this element, you really need to flesh it out. So having that kind of capability at the board level and at the operating level, CIO, means you can kind of make decisions with tone at the top and then operating management. And I think that's more, I think there was a study that MIT did. I think it came out at that CIO chat live that we went to in Boston. One of the MIT speakers talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
Companies that had more than one IT knowledgeable person on the board did much better financially than companies that did not.
Yeah. I beat this drum as well. Like your board has to be technical savvy. Not all the board members can be. So you need at least one or two people who are tech savvy, and it can be a pluggable sort of arrangement, if you will. So they may not be a board member. You bring some specialist into these board meetings, and you can even kind of circulate them. Means like you can use like 3 or 4 and then bring different ones and at different times and tap into their experiences. And I think good boards do that, and they tap into the expertise of the people who have done a lot of work in a lot of different industries.
Yeah, there's an entire industry advising boards on everything from tax policy to succession planning to salaries to IT. It is an industry, but it becomes a question of whether you think that using IT more effectively, managing the risk and taking advantage of opportunities, is a core competence of your company. To your point, how much of what you deliver, maybe not today, but tomorrow, your aspirational delivery, is based on technology.
Exactly.
If you think that the future of your company is defined by technology, don't hire an expert, hire a board member. So they're at every meeting, so that they have the duty of care. One of the board duties is the duty of care. You have to care about the company. You have to put their interests ahead of yours. And so that is an important thing, to be at every deliberation, every discussion, to have the informal relationships that a consultant just doesn't get. And so I think it's how you treat technology. Is it strategic or is it tactical? And that would determine whether you need a QTE director or a QTE advisor to the board.
Yeah, I think the technology is both tactical and strategic. So that's why I said, like, if you don't have a macro technology strategy, you don't have a technology strategy. So having the macro technology strategy makes it more like strategic sort of kind of play, if you will. And then, of course, on day-to-day basis or month-to-month or quarter-to-quarter basis, you have to make some decisions, which makes it more tactical. So I think with that, we will wrap up. Any other departing thoughts you want to leave us with?
Well, I'll just say what I said to a lot of people. I think that COVID is changing the speed at which we're sensing and responding. And over the last N number of years that I've been doing this, there's been a measured pace to change. I think the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months are going to see more change in business, more change in technology, more change in how we apply technology than we've seen in somewhere between a decade and a generation. And so I've never been more excited to work in IT than I am right now.
Wayne, thank you very much for joining me. Sorry for the mess up. I went live before, and then you actually were on time. Thank you very much.
Hope we made up for it.
Yeah, we did. It was fun.
Thank you, sir.
We'll carry
Appreciate
on
it.
this conversation offline. Thanks, guys, for watching. And this will be, of course, archived. I'll put this on YouTube as well. So thanks to Wayne. Stay tuned for more episodes. Stay healthy. Thanks.
You too.
Bye. Bye.